Some would consider Dungeons & Dragons to be a more intimate group activity than your average game. Unlike a board game or a video game, D&D has players create an entire character and personally act as their character in great depth, creating a greater sense of immersion and bonding with your fellow players, the DM, and the world at large. You have full liberty to speak and act as your character in a jointly made, make-believe world. However, this friendly intimacy is not the same as romantic intimacy. I would honestly say the greater friendly intimacy actually makes it far more intimidating when it comes to romance, both in-game and out. In-game flirting is especially scary since it is also public. To suddenly put someone in that position in front of a group of people can be in bad taste. Now, for your cringe entertainment, here's 4 horror stories for you to enjoy. In the background, I've prepared some teamfight tactics gameplay to satiate our human desire for bright colors and stimulus. Now, without further ado, here's our first story by Reddit user Red Hot Owl, posted on r/RPG horror stories. Player becomes infatuated with my NPC, demands I erotic roleplay with her. Not graphic, but marking it as NSFW just in case. I'll start off by giving you all some context. I've always been interested in the storytelling aspects of RPGs. However, I haven't had the greatest of experiences when trying to get into traditional TTRPGs like D&D. Stories for another time. This is long enough as it is. So, around 7 or 8 years ago, while I was still in high school, some friends I met through World of Warcraft suggested that I GM, if you can even call it that, a sort of choose-your-own-adventure style session for them that was primarily focused on plot and RP. The actual mechanics were very simplistic and pretty much only there to settle the occasional dispute, since the purpose of the whole thing was a sort of collaborative writing adventure, where the main focus was to tell a story with me acting as the story's narrator. To this day, I'm not sure whether they came up with the concept on their own, or if this style of play has an official name. They literally just called it a narrative RPG. I'm sure the more experienced among you can tell me whether that's a thing or not. I've never been much of a role player, but I am, I'd like to think, a passable writer, especially considering that English isn't my first language. So, in spite of my reluctance, I eventually agreed to create a narrative for their characters. Given the rules-light nature of the game, a lot of restrictions had to be enforced by the lore and just general common sense, but I rarely had anyone going into business for themselves, since doing so would have been counterintuitive to everyone's enjoyment. There were ways to get your character killed if you really wanted to, sure, but I had no incentive to deliberately stifle anyone, nor did the players have any reason to go out of their way to pick fights they couldn't win. Overall, it was a surprisingly fun time and gave me a chance to flex my creative muscles. I started putting more and more effort into the world, crafting stories and adventures my players could choose to partake in, with different outcomes depending on their actions or inactions. That is, until a player I'll just refer to as Jane came along. I was officially introduced to Jane via voice chat, and I gave her a rundown of the setting, the current campaign's progress, and the general guidelines for designing her character. She seemed pretty receptive to it all and was eager to join in on the party's adventure, even going the extra mile by making her first character my world's equivalent of a healer, so that the party, who were a tight-knit band of former cutthroats, had an incentive to bring her along. It created an interesting dynamic where Jane's sheltered character grew accustomed to the world at the same rate she did, bringing some much-needed contrast to the party's composition. If I absolutely had to nitpick, I'd say that she liked playing the role of the damsel in distress a bit too often for my liking. But no one else seemed to mind, so I refrained from commenting on it at the time. Following the party's decision to side with the guards during an uprising, they were invited to the royal palace, where they were to meet and be congratulated by the royal family themselves for playing a pivotal role in subduing the rebellion. Pleasantries were exchanged and meaningless titles were granted, before the party was sent back to their base in the slums. If that sounds underwhelming, it's because that was the point. I was trying to establish how detached the nobles were from the plight of their subjects. Despite all my efforts to write them as condescending dicks, one of the members of the royal family, who I'll just refer to as the prince, seemed to have left an impression on Jane's character. To clarify, the prince was the youngest of the king's sons and the embodiment of narcissism. I wrote him to be as douchey and elitist as possible, which made the healer's sudden crush on him all the more baffling. Yes, I described him as very physically attractive, but that was literally his only redeeming quality, and there was no shortage of traditionally attractive NPCs and player characters constantly surrounding her. That said, Jane's character was meant to be naive, so I figured her swooning over a guy that despises everything she represents could have been used to highlight her inexperience. Unfortunately, it was nothing as self-aware as that. Both in character and out, Jane kept bringing the prince up, much to the rest of the party's annoyance. She insisted that they fully align themselves with the crown in hopes of earning more favor, while simultaneously asking me when they were going to be meeting him again. As you can probably guess, Loverboy was vocally against this for obvious reasons. Perhaps I should have been more stern in railroading them away from that entire plotline, but in my defense, I was really committed to adapting to everyone's choices. Jane got her way eventually, dragging everyone along with her and forcing me to come up with more and more stuff they could do for the gentry. I made a point of clearly telling her that their efforts were appreciated, but it wasn't getting them any closer to another audience with the prince. Keep in mind that this was an NPC I hadn't even put that much thought into at the time, since I never expected him to be anything beyond an entitled prick whose entire purpose was to symbolize the blatant disconnect between the common man and the ruling class. I could have, and eventually did, flesh him out more, but at the time nobody apart from Jane cared about him enough to justify doing that. Loverboy was getting pretty fed up by Jane's infatuation with my NPC, and out of character demanded that we move on to something else. I explained that I had been presenting them with different plot hooks this entire time, but instead they just kept catering to the healer's whims, who had pretty much assumed somewhat of a de facto leader role. If nothing else, the mental image of a ragtag group of hardened outlaws following around a teenage girl pursuing her crush was kind of amusing. Finally picking up on the group's frustrations, Jane relented and we were allowed to move on to something else. It was at this point when Loverboy's character started trying to get closer to Jane's, which, while awkward at times, at least made sense since they had a thing IRL. Both their characters were of a similar age and it didn't interfere with my storytelling. Jane was open-minded to the idea, but didn't seem particularly excited about it. Her healer and his cutthroat continued with their in-character flirting throughout several campaigns, but their relationship never evolved past the occasional innuendo or remark. All was well until that fateful evening when I saw that Jane had messaged me several times on Skype. When I opened our conversation, I saw paragraph upon paragraph of her, I'm assuming in character, proclaiming her love for the prince and straight up demanding to meet him again. It's been a long time, so I don't remember exactly what she said, but I distinctly remember her threatening to leave the friend group altogether if I didn't make it happen. She went on to guilt-trip me by saying that it would have been my fault if Loverboy, I kid you not, killed himself over her leaving without a word, since she was apparently helping him battle through some mental issues none of us were aware of. I honestly had no idea how to react. I remember just sitting there, reading through her messages, and trying to formulate some sort of adequate reply in my head. Eventually, I settled on the worst thing I could have probably done. I proposed to narrate a private, non-canon exchange between her healer and the prince. Obviously, she agreed and was pretty enthusiastic about it, as though she hadn't just threatened my friend's mental health in order to get her way. I have no excuse for choosing to indulge her instead of immediately talking to Loverboy about the whole thing. I guess I was both worried about him and scared of our friend group disbanding, which eventually happened anyway, but over an unrelated incident. Fast forward to the day of my private session with Jane. The scene opened with the prince standing on a balcony overlooking the royal gardens, and her character being invited into his quarters. I obviously knew what she was after, so I made up some bullshit reason as to why he had taken a sudden interest in her. I don't remember what it was. Both expressed their inexplicable infatuation with each other, and things obviously got heated, so I hurriedly faded to black, but Jane wasn't having it. She was basically expecting me to erotic roleplay with her, something I had never done and had no interest in doing. I explained to her that, at the time, I wasn't really interested in exploring sexual stuff both in and out of character. Cue the porn. That's right, folks. Jane seemed to have thought that all I needed was some inspiration, and so in her infinite wisdom, proceeded to spam pictures and gifs of explicit acts she wanted my character to do to hers. Then she went on to make the whole thing 10 times weirder by expressing how this sort of content was making her feel. Though both of us were 18 at the time, I still don't feel comfortable recounting her exact words. Let's just say she was making me increasingly uncomfortable until she left me no choice but to tell her off. She took it as well as you'd expect. She then left the group and blocked all of us, including Loverboy. He took it pretty hard, but got over it after confiding in the rest of us instead. Not sure what Jane has been up to since then. I had seen her mention in passing a few times before our WoW guild got disbanded, since most of us moved on to other games. Apparently, she is currently married, so I genuinely wish her all the best and hope that she has grown as a person since the above-mentioned incident. Only recently did me and Loverboy reconnect, who you can thank for reminding me about Jane and directing me to this subreddit. It's a mildly uncomfortable experience at best compared to the other stories I've read on here, but I thought it might be worth sharing. Edit. Just to be clear, I'm not implying that my friend did anything wrong in this scenario. The ridiculous nickname I've given him is just a harmless in-joke between us that I like teasing him about. End post. This next story comes from Reddit user Impossibly Probable 59 on r/RPG Horror Stories. Post titled, How I Got Kicked Out of My First D&D Group for Refusing to Date the DM. Roll post. So at the time this story took place, I was in high school. I, 16 female, was approached by a guy, 18 male, asking if I wanted to join his D&D group, after he overheard me talking to a friend about D&D. I went to a small school, so I knew most people. He seemed pretty harmless. It was a group of 6, including me and the DM. They were all 17 or 18, and I was the only girl in the group. We played at the DM's house, and I didn't see any crazy red flags initially. After a few games together, things got weird. The party was interrogating a woman. I can't remember why exactly. But it was something related to a smuggling ring, and everyone was insisting that my character be the one to do the interrogation because I was the only girl, and it would have been weird for them to do it. When I tried persuading the NPC to give up the information we needed, she refused. And the DM told me that she wouldn't give up any information unless we tortured her. I told him I really didn't want to do that, and he said I was being a bad player for disrespecting him. Everyone kept pushing me, and I ended up excusing myself from the table, and the DM eventually moved on and let someone else do the rest of the interrogation. That was the first major red flag that I wouldn't enjoy playing at this table. But I really wanted to play D&D, and I was an anxious teenager who really wanted friends who shared my interests, so I persevered. Apart from this, there were a lot of small moments that made me uncomfortable. Male NPCs hit on my character every other session, and the DM would not stop trying to get me to describe myself harming people. This wasn't just him wanting realistic combat, since he didn't ask this from anyone else. At this point, I'm convinced it was some sort of kink or fetish. I told him multiple times that I was uncomfortable with that level of graphic violence. He'd back off for a while, then do the exact same thing again next session. The DM's mom started inviting me to stay for dinner after games, which I thought was very kind of her. My home life wasn't great, so it was nice to have an adult who was nice to me. Turns out, she was only nice to me because she thought I was dating her son. After a few months of weekly games, the DM asked me to stay behind after our game and asked me on a date. I was completely stunned. I was very open about being a lesbian, and I had no idea why he thought I'd even be remotely interested in him. I told him I wasn't interested and tried to leave. He then told me that if I didn't agree to go on a date with him, he'd kick me out of the group. I asked him, "Did you only invite me to this group to hit on me?" And this man literally said, "Yeah, why else would I invite a girl?" I ditched the group immediately after that and didn't play D&D for 2 years. I picked it up again this year, and recounting this story to my new group reminded me of how messed up it was. End post. This next story comes to us from Master Figmus on r/RPG Horror Stories. The post is titled, My Friend Asked Me to DM so he can flirt. Then he tries to cancel the game when he gets rejected. Roll post. This happened almost 10 years ago, but I was thinking about it today. D&D 5e had just come out and I had just started playing when a friend of mine asked me if I could run a game for him and a few of his friends. I'd known him for a year or so, but had never met the other players. It was my first time DMing, so I went out and bought a DM screen, then ordered a player's handbook. The plan was a weekly game. We'd play at my friend's house where I met the players and everyone made characters. It was 4 guys and 1 girl. The players include Warlock, the friend and problem, Druid, the girl, a fighter, a paladin, and a rogue. I found out that Warlock was attracted to Druid about an hour into the session when he suddenly pivoted conversation to aggressively press Druid on why she was with her boyfriend in real life. She was taken aback. I did my best to steer the table of strangers back to the game from an awkward silence. Afterward, Druid talked to Warlock about why this was inappropriate. The next session, they walked around town and found quests. All throughout, Warlock flirted with her character and announced that his character found hers sexy whenever he could. Druid was a halfling and Warlock was a half-elf, so I said it would be weird. He made a joke about her not needing to go on her knees, so I moved on. We didn't meet the following week, and I was starting to get into DMing, so I took the time to really dig into the game and design my first dungeon. I put a lot of effort into a haunted mansion. Then, the day before the 3rd session, Warlock texts me that he has decided to cancel the game. He felt the players were flaky and that he could not play with such unreliable people. I told him I wanted to at least run the next session because I worked really hard on it, but he refused to play and said that I couldn't do it without him because it was his game at his house. So I did it without him. We met somewhere else and one of Druid's friends joined in Warlock's place. They liked my dungeon and had fun, so I decided I'd continue to run the game. It went on for 3 years and I still play with 2 of the same players today, 10 years later. As for Warlock, I found out later that he had asked Druid out and been shot down, prompting him to try canceling the game. Our friendship more or less ended there. I saw him occasionally for a few more months, but he got super weird and possessive. The rest is really not related to RPGs. End post. This next story comes to us from Reddit user Just Another Valerie, post titled DM Flirts After a Single Game. Now, this post is actually a series of screenshots of some text messages. Because this story is purely a dialogue, I will use blue text to represent the DM, and pink text to represent the OP. Roll post. I am so sorry, I wasn't prepared to DM. We normally have a lot ready. You're good, lol. Really? I thought I failed. Nah, it was fun, and I've been in that situation before, so I know how it feels. You're way too kind. I'm just the right amount of kind the world needs. I was also nervous. I couldn't tell. Trust me, man, I've seen some rough DMs, and you aren't one of them. You're very beautiful. Very trans. Trans? I couldn't tell. Very well done, I had no idea. Can I ask a personal? Go for it. Are you fully female now? Bro. Sorry. I probably shouldn't expect it, lol. It's one of the more common questions I get asked, but it never really gets any less awkward telling people that it's weird to ask what my genitals look like. I'm so sorry, you don't have to say, I am so wrong once I've asked it. Please forgive me. I'm processing. Please don't tell me, I shouldn't have asked, you're just so pretty. End post. God, that made me fucking cringe, holy shit. Christ. This next story comes to us from Reddit user MarionBerry945 on r/RPG Horror Stories, post titled, My Player Fell in Love with the BBEG, parentheses, for real. Roll post. I ran a D&D campaign and I told all the players it would be a fairly dark setting and the possibility of death is always looming. I asked the players if there was any content they wished not to be featured in the campaign before I start writing. All the players were on board and seemed excited for the adventure. The first few sessions went great. That was until a beloved NPC, who was a tailor, died. This led to our subject of today, let's call him Joe, spending the next few sessions derailing the campaign and was insistent we find a cleric who was able to bring the tailor back to life. I informed them at the start they'd have to go all the way back to the starting city, as due to the setting, most clerics and whatnot were unable to do that. They eventually revived the tailor, and things were all sunshine and rainbows for a while, until in a session an NPC betrayed the party. Most of the party loved it, but not Joe. Joe had messaged me saying they cannot handle betrayals, and they felt as though I was violating the characters. I tried to smooth things over, and they said it was a hard limit for them. I tried to explain to them how some of the characters' backstories are based on these things, and their character moments. And just because they turn on you doesn't mean you have to kill them. We came to an understanding that when it came to characters they had a close bond with, or from their backstory, they could not be evil or go against the party. Mildly frustrating, but I handled it. Halfway through the campaign, they meet the BBEG, who is not a secret BBEG. He announced himself as the mastermind of the evil doings in the world and literally calls himself an evil mastermind. Joe fell in love with the character, to the point that fanfic and drawings were made. That was odd, to say the least. And what happens when a player is genuinely madly in love with an NPC? You pull them aside and ask them if they're actually being serious about it. And, as the DM, if you cannot handle it, you act like adults and find a solution, even if it means a player leaving the campaign or writing out that character. That is not what happened, though. Instead, we powered through. I received a new, updated list of what Joe could not handle. Most of it was manageable, and we even found a routine. If something dark and gritty was going to happen, they could leave the room so the players who loved that stuff can still hear about the gruesome tales. On that list was a BBEG cannot be killed. I thought it was a joke because of the way it was written. It was not. When the BBEG was fighting them and about to be killed mid-combat, they started crying and started hurling insults and slurs in their panic attack. I realized this could have been handled a lot better on my part, as I could have mitigated this a lot sooner. I no longer run D&D for Joe, but we still play together. I prefer to tell darker stories while they prefer lighthearted adventures with low stakes. Both are perfectly valid, and we still play together sometimes in a very lighthearted adventure about Vikings. I have learned when I ask for what content players don't want to be included, I should make sure to ask what they expect from a campaign and what they're okay with their character going through. I would never do sexual assault or torture a player character anyway, but others have more limits, which is okay. Some people are not okay with their player childhood friend being bad or getting an axe in the back, and some live for it. End post. This next post comes to us from Reddit user Jun Soo Jin on r/D&D horror stories. Post is titled Never Date a DM, parentheses, my first D&D campaign. Roll post. Where do I even begin with this? I never even once in my life played D&D before, but I was really into the Just Roll With It podcast and was really interested in trying it out. One day at a parade, I noticed two guys with D20 bracelets. Let's call them Jake and Aiden. I walked up to them and struck up a conversation about D&D. They were really friendly and ended up giving me their socials. A little while later, they invited me to a campaign that Jake was DMing and Aiden was a player in. It turned out that it was a sci-fi campaign with a lot of homebrew, so I was in over my head from the start. But Jake and Aiden helped me make a character for the setting, and I learned how to play 5e in my spare time. Before I knew it, the day of the first session I would be joining had come. It should be mentioned here that I'm a girl, and almost the entire rest of the group were men. I had a lot of fun at first, mostly because I had no idea what was going on. I would eventually find out that Jake's campaign was originally supposed to be a book, but he liked it so much that he decided to make a campaign out of it with minimal changes to the plot and structure. Literally, the DM who should have just been an author trope. And it was painfully obvious that it was not originally intended to be a campaign. We were heavily railroaded and had to take orders directly from a self-insert character named Knight Xeon. I'm not making this up. The plot was also so convoluted that only Jake himself understood it, and he prided himself on this fact. But all of these constraints and craziness couldn't take away the magic of my first time playing D&D, and I really enjoyed it for a few months. Then it started getting weird. Jake had been hyping up the next session as the beach episode. Knight ordered the party to get some much needed rest and relaxation and brought them to a ship that was basically a space resort. All the main characters were in swimsuits in a pool, there were parties, etc. I didn't really know what to do, and the whole thing kinda seemed out of nowhere. Then, Knight started coming on to my character. I was weirded out by this, but the rest of the table was laughing and joking about it, so I just kinda went along with it. There was eventually a fade to black moment, and that was that. My character and the DM's self-insert had canonically done the deed. Gross. A few more months passed, and I was hanging out at Jake's house one day, when suddenly he looked really serious. He asked me if I wanted to go on a date. I wasn't attracted to him at all, but he was my friend and I didn't want to break his heart, so I said, I don't really know if I want to be in a relationship right now. He responded, quote, you don't have to make any commitments, it's just a date, end quote. I felt a little pressured and I figured I owed him at least one date, since he was a good friend to me, so in a moment of weakness, I agreed. No, gross. You don't owe anybody a date. That's not how dates work. Oh, God, sorry to interrupt the story. That one just sent a shiver up my spine, something fierce. The next day, he told the entire table that we were together. Okay. Sorry. Things got really bad from there. He would give me all sorts of special treatment in the campaign, even having sessions that entirely revolved around my character. All of the players started to hate me, and I had no good way of explaining to them that I didn't sign up for any of this. Jake started to get really paranoid about me talking to other male members of the group or interacting with their characters too much. He would lash out at them if he thought I was talking to them or their characters more than him, sometimes refusing to talk to me at all after the session. Eventually I had enough and, quote, broke up with him, end quote. Even though I hadn't been in the relationship by choice. At the moment, he seemed to take it pretty well and we had a mature conversation about it. The day after that, he removed me from the D&D group chat and blocked me. I found out weeks later that he had told everyone that I had left of my own accord because I didn't want to be a player in the campaign anymore. The cherry on top? It turned out that Jake never wanted me in the campaign in the first place. Aiden convinced him to let me join because he thought I was attractive and wanted to get closer to me. And then after a few weeks of me being in the campaign, Jake convinced Aiden to let him ask me out instead. I want to make it perfectly clear that these were two adult men in their 20s. Obviously, I wanted nothing to do with that D&D group after this. However, Aiden eventually reached out to me to apologize and informed me that they had kicked Jake out and had a new DM. So, happy ending, I guess. This next post comes to us from r/D&D horror stories from Reddit user AliveEditor9392. Post titled, My fellow player started hitting on me through my D&D character. Roll post. First time poster. So last year I played D&D for the first time with a group of friends. We've known each other for years. I played a tiefling sorcerer. One of my friends who I sat next to at the table kept calling my character pretty boy, or sexy, or himbo. I didn't mind this at all at first, but then they started saying these things to me out of game, going so far as to introduce me as pretty boy to people and touching my hair, face, shoulders. I'm not that physically affectionate and I'm in a committed relationship. My friend knew this. In-game, they started blocking my rolls, speaking over me, and telling me what I can and can't do, which I later found out were not the problems. Not to mention the sudden racism. We are a mixed group of people and we do not share these views. It took all of us by surprise that our friend of years suddenly viewed people in a creepy type of way. I told my DM about this, but he didn't do anything. I started skipping sessions so I wouldn't get touched or flirted with. I did tell them to leave me alone, and my friends said they understand and that they were sorry that they made me feel uncomfortable. Lo and behold, next session, they poked me in my side to get my attention, the only part of my body on show. I lost it and said I would not play D&D unless they were removed. My DM didn't do anything. They left the group, but we all stopped playing together. I later found out the DM and that player moved in with each other. I want to get into D&D again, but wow, this still sticks with me. End post. This final story comes to us from r/D&D horror stories from a deleted Reddit user. The post is titled, "The Time I Ended a Relationship and Destroyed a Group by Doing Little to Nothing on Accident." Roll post. So about a year ago, I had been looking for some new online friends to play D&D with. None of my friends liked DMing, and I was getting burnt out on it myself. I wanted to play as a player for once. So I went on Reddit and managed to find a group to join. On the surface, it was a bit odd as I had to apply, but I was quickly informed that it was just to weed out people who were barely literate, since it was all going to be over text, and people who were particularly intolerant, as one of the members was gay and that had caused problems in her previous group. I understood and agreed, passing the first test easily. It was just a yes or no test about not being a dickhead, basically. The second test was a bit odder. My interviewer, a woman, wanted me to roleplay a slice-of-life session with her to make sure I was a good enough writer, I guess. I agreed, still not seeing the red flags that were pretty clear there, and did it. It was weird, but fairly normal, aside from 1 or 2 times when she tried to make it somewhat sexual, which I shut down as I really wasn't interested. Regardless, I was told I passed and was let into the group. I was pretty excited to get in and to start playing, so I rolled my character, a human cleric, that same day, even though the first session was still a week away. While waiting, I also got to know the group. There was the person who interviewed me, we'll call her Sam, the DM, Sam's friend Kate, Sam's boyfriend Dave. They were all pretty cool, but also a bit off. Dave was super nerdy and awkward, but was an alright guy. Kate was very into anime and would occasionally send nyans with her messages. The DM was super chill, but always seemed just a bit off. But Dave, Kate, and the DM were all normal compared to Sam. What I didn't realize at the time, but know now, is that Sam was a total psychopath. During the first session, she DMs me and starts flirting with me, and not subtly. Keep in mind, we hadn't really spoken much, and all she knew about me was that I liked D&D and that I was a guy. I didn't even tell her my real name. I brushed it off and just kept playing, ignoring her DMs and hoping she would move on. Things got worse when, over the course of the campaign, she started belittling and attacking Dave while praising me. For example, during an encounter, Dave rolled a natural 1 and failed to kill an enemy that was at low health and targeting Sam. Since I moved next, I attacked and killed it, which led to Sam chastising Dave for, quote, not protecting her, end quote, and calling me her white knight. I kind of brushed it off because it didn't really seem to bother Dave, Kate, or the DM, who actually knew Sam, so I figured that was just how they joked around. The rest of the session went pretty normally, with Sam repeatedly DMing me flirtatious messages about the campaign, which I ignored. When the session ended, we all thanked the DM and broke to meet up next week, only Sam kept messaging me. Eventually, I decided it would be best to nip this in the bud and just tell her I wasn't interested. I told her that I was already in a relationship and wasn't really comfortable with the flirting, but that I'd love to be friends. She took it pretty well and agreed that it was inappropriate, but also asked me not to tell Dave. I reluctantly agreed on the condition that she tell him herself. The next couple of sessions were pretty normal. Although the flirting stopped, Sam kept chastising Dave's character and flirting with mine. Dave and Kate seemed to be good sports about it, even joking about having their characters set hours up, so I mostly ignored it. Besides, my character was basically a celibate monk, so I figured could just be ribbing about that. Then one session, it got particularly bad. Dave's character was a stereotypical edgy knight. We had just taken down a camp of cultists, and Kate suggested we interrogate them. Dave, acting fully in character, said he wanted to torture them for information. My lawful good monk disagreed. Sam, despite being true evil, decided to side with me and proceeded to unleash a torrent of insults against Dave and his character, the kind of stuff that would make a nun blush. After she was done, Dave said he was done for the day, and we all agreed to break. I DM'd Dave about an hour later and asked if he was okay. I also messaged Kate and the DM to ask if this was a usual thing and what they thought we should do. All of them told me the same thing. Quote, "It's okay, don't worry, and don't get involved." End quote. I reluctantly let it go. The next day, however, I woke up to a series of messages from Sam. The first few said that she loved me and wanted to be with me. Then she sent a 9 to 10 paragraph long, one-sided, sexually explicit RP between our characters. Then she sent me a series of nudes of someone she claims was her. Parentheses, which frankly I still don't really believe. I told her I was seriously uncomfortable with all of this and to stop messaging me privately. At this point, I was also considering leaving the group, but she apologized and told me she was, quote, off her meds, end quote. I told her I was still uncomfortable with us DMing, and she said she'd stop. About an hour later, I got another DM from her, this time telling me she told Dave about, quote, us, end quote, and now he was threatening to kill her, and that she had nowhere else to turn. I told her I'd talked to Dave and that he seemed like a reasonable guy, but if she was scared, she should call the police or tell someone who could help, given that I wasn't even in the same country as her. I DM'd Dave and asked what was going on. He said he didn't know about what I was talking about, so I explained, and he didn't respond for a while. About an hour later, he told me he had just broken up with Sam and that this was the first time he had heard about any of it. Meanwhile, Sam started messaging me, talking about how, quote, now that Dave's out of the way, we can be together, end quote, and that I was a true alpha, which is the opposite of true. I told her I wasn't interested, but she thought it was part of some act and told me she was only dating Dave to make fun of him and use him for money. As this was going on, Kate started messaging me, calling me a homewrecker, and Dave sent me an extremely long message that I could only classify as an incel manifesto. Finally, I decided to block all three of them and messaged the DM to tell him I was out. Interestingly enough, when I told him, he said he actually didn't know any of them and that Sam was secretly paying him to DM. He thought they were all pretty weird too, but the money was good and they mostly left him alone. Anyway, that's my Nightmare D&D story. TLDR, I joined an online group and was harassed by a crazy girl, which led to a total group meltdown. End post. Thank you all for watching this video. I hope that it helped you in some way. Maybe as entertainment, or perhaps as a cold shower regarding your own or someone else's behavior. Regardless, I hope this incredibly niche blend of teamfight tactics and RPG horror stories was helpful to you in some way. Have a wonderful night, and stay safe.